Why are we here? Well, this is a unique time in the industry. We're facing the challenge of carbon emissions. We're fortunate to have an increasingly effective and diverse tool set to deal with that, yet we work in a rate paradigm and an infrastructure access paradigm that's 100 years old. This is complex stuff, and it'll take a lot more than a 15-minute TED Talk to get it all accomplished. There's a lot of federal and state regulatory proceedings going on, but these tend to be focused on very specific proposals. My goals today are to encourage you to think at a 30,000-foot level and come up with ways to deal with these things at a 10,000 and 1,000-foot level that are consistent with each other. I'm not going to dive very deep into the details of the different technologies that are out there, but instead focus on what I think is the biggest challenge, and that's perverse price signals. Justin will be talking about electric vehicles to sort of give you an example of some of the technology. At the end of the day, this is a teaser for more detailed discussions that EPRI will have in Long Beach in August, and for a panel discussion we're going to have here in October. Now I've lost it. Okay. First, being a Catholic boy, I got to go to confession. I'm a lawyer by training, but a tech geek and a wannabe economist. When I was in law school here, I worked at the government printing office, which we used to joke had the Gutenberg press and the latest word processors. I moved off to the Office of Federal Inspector for the Alaska gas pipeline, and I was forced back to dictation and writing things on pads, but I snuck in at night to use the word processors. I was one of the first people to get a laptop computer. This one weighed 24 pounds. When we opened John Haeger and Esposito in 1986, my IT guy said, "You sure you want to do this? You'll be the first law firm in DC that's networked with word processors." I said, "I want to do this because I know how much paper Doug John has on his desk." So we got a 20 megabyte file server. We started scanning using a fax. We barcoded files. I was a beta tester for Dragon voice recognition. Brooks Carter remembers me as the guy who was always bugging him for e-filings. And I started working from home with a modem. I was fortunate enough to move to Colorado in 1996, where eventually, or shortly thereafter, I ended up with video conferencing. I'm also, like I said, a wannabe economist. And in 1974, I was in college and had a $600 resistance heat bill while making $1.25 washing pots an hour. So when I designed my house in Colorado, you'll see my house, I had passive solar, rock storage, and later active thermal solar. And right now I heat almost 10,000 square feet for less than $300 a month, and we get to 30 below regularly during the winter. I also have, as you can see, LED lighting. None of this will ever pay out, but the fact of the matter is I made the choice, I voted with my dollars, and didn't have somebody else make that decision for me. So why are these all important? I'm living proof that technology can increase your standard of living at the same time decreasing energy usage. More importantly, I know that there's a lot of great advances out there that we don't even know about right now, and this technology is just the start. I view technology as a life changer. In 2001, the last time I appeared before this audience, someone asked me what would be the big game changers going forward, and I blurted out nanotechnology and artificial intelligence. I wasn't quite sure what they really were, what they would be, but as you can see, we've taken conversation, phones, TVs, encyclopedias, and so on, and put them in a little phone that could be in our hand. This isn't our first rodeo on technology change in the industry. The pattern of technology advances goes back a long way. We were talking about a lot of these things 100 years ago. Electrification, which EPRI's conference is all about, was Samuel Insull's idea. He was competing with microgrids. And he had, fortunately for him, Thomas Edison to help him increase load with all new inventions. It's also not the first time we've had gas compete with power. Insol's model was, we'll electrify, we'll keep increasing demand, so when we build central plants, the cost of those central plants will be spread over many more kilowatt hours. He quickly ran into a problem with load management, peaks and valleys during the day, came up with traction, was what he called, and electric streetcars, basically. Also found that he had to control peaks and initiated demand charges, all of which are still here. Now, some of Edison's ideas worked and some of them did. Many people might know that Thomas Edison and Henry Ford were great friends, and they tried to get electric cars going. Edison's nickel-ion batteries could not power the car, and lead-acid batteries were too heavy. So we're still experiencing battery issues. Nonetheless, load grew enough, and Insel, who was the proponent of monopoly regulation, was able to get eventually the states and the federal government to trade franchise for rate-based or cost-based rate making. This was almost 100 years ago today. Now we have, the whole model depended on load growth. And Insel and Edison and other inventors were able to keep load growth going, lower per unit costs, and everything was fine. Once in a while there would be a blip with fuel costs rising or the economy cratering as in the Great Depression, and that model wasn't working so well. But overall, customers were kind of stuck with what they had in terms of electric appliances, et cetera, so they couldn't change rapidly. Now, however, we have two big things facing us. Carbon, which is going to cause us to have to invest a lot of money in new technology, and load stagnation. These kind of pictures convince people that we do have a carbon problem, we have to do something about it. The real challenge is, what are we going to pay for it and how effective is it going to be? A lot of people say it doesn't matter, we have to pay for it, life goes on. I say it's not just if we deal with it, but how much we pay and how effective we are at reducing carbon. Politicians, however, are more interested in creating jobs than they are in economics. So we've got subsidies out there right now that often bear little or no relation to how effective a given technology will be, and they don't even have a relationship to each other. Solar has an investment tax credit, wind has a tax credit based on production, batteries get a tax credit if they're linked to solar. State incentives vary widely, you have thresholds and standards to deal with, and potentially worse still, cost-based rate making and the incentives that go along with that skew investments even further. Under this paradigm, as everybody in this room knows, utilities have a choice between making massive capital investments that pump out attractive returns or buying services such as demand response software, which they have to administer and make nothing on. To me, that's a choice between having a money tree and a headache with no aspirin. So what about price signals? Right now we face a double whammy. Without rationally based price signals, and with a rate-making paradigm skewed towards heavy capital investment, how do we know when we are effectively deploying our capital, spending our resources on actually solving the carbon problem? So let's start with what we have. We know that solar and wind, once installed, emit no carbon. But we also know that when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing, we need something to back them up. And that's either going to be more generation or batteries. Batteries are fast becoming the first thing out of the public's mouth when they think about how we store energy and deliver it later. Drawbacks, obviously, are cost, life, disposal, with lithium-ion safety, the availability of rare earth metals, and what I call technology lock-in. Once we've invested in and got it in our minds, lithium ion is the way to go, it's tough to get people to think of something else. But batteries aren't the only answer. Hydro is storage, but it's not always available. And wind and solar from other parts of the country, if you could transmit it in, can also be effective. And of course, there's demand response. Other backup choices are generation we already have: gas-fired plants, nuclear, compressed air energy storage, and flywheels, which haven't really caught on yet, hydrogen, salt brine, but each of these have different costs and capabilities. And they all depend, to one degree or another, on transmission. And of course, we all know building new transmission is a real challenge. But even here, there are options. We can retrofit some of the wires and use the same rights-of-way. And there's new technology. I don't know how many of you have heard of a new technology called smart wires, which purports to act as a valve, much like a valve on a gas pipeline. This has huge capabilities for dealing with loop flow and creating a lot of capacity that can't be effectively used today. Then we have something that I really like, and I call it virtual storage and unknown unknowns. And this is a combination of all of the last few slides, plus software and artificial intelligence that can control these sources and sinks optimally, incorporate demand response, and use the whole system much more efficiently at a much higher load factor. And this new technology can be nascent or things that haven't been discovered yet. EVs are obviously part of the solution, but they are a long way off from market penetration. And there are numerous questions beyond battery technology, such as how do we charge them, what the range are, and things of that nature, which Justin will be discussing shortly. So what next? Today we're looking at some of these options, but we are doing these mainly in isolation. The PUCs, the PSCs, the RTOs, the ISOs, the FERC, the process is such that the discussions tend to be focused on one or two narrow proposals. And with price signals, this makes it even harder, or missing price signals, it makes it even harder to deal with. So I'll leave you with a few suggestions here. KISS, not the rock band. Keep it simple, stupid. To the extent we can regulate or structure markets in a simple way rather than drilling down with complexity after complexity after complexity, we're going to end up being much more effective. Second, question the hype. You're going to hear that the cost of some new technology is going to come down 50% in the next 2 years. But if it has to come down 90% to be cost effective, how good is it? Similarly, if market penetration is going to go up 500%, that all sounds great, but if it's only 1% now and it's 5% in 5 years, whatever the time frame is, are we really making good progress there? Third, market signals really count in the long run. Yes, we can't change our furnaces to heat pumps like that, but eventually, people who are building new houses will turn to the best technology available at the time, and the market signals will ultimately get back to the people selling the power. And if it's a utility and their load goes down, everybody's rates go up, and the old economic death spiral kicks in. Fourth, try to minimize collective risk. If there's a private party that's willing to put at-risk capital to work, as opposed to having the utility fund something and basically mortgaging our future for the next 10 years, look at that private capital, that at-risk capital, as a way to hedge against obsolescence or problems with technology life cycles. Maximize future optionality. When we're coming up with standards and ways to access the infrastructure, we ought to be looking at what would be the equivalent of open source software and ways to bring more new technologies to the forefront and onto the system. Finally, don't be afraid of high utility returns. The gas model, and I know this is heresy in front of people who are in the power industry, worked. We took the gas pipelines out of the merchant function. We told them they didn't have to come back for rate cases every year or 2 or 3 years. And what they did was they found places, short segments to loop, put compression in, and otherwise make little improvements that increased their throughput and their revenues with their existing rates. And they were making upwards of 20% returns, but the rates weren't going up. Finally, the only constant here is change, and we ought to be prepared for that. So my last parting piece of advice is to remain calm. Don't get nomophobia when your phone needs to be charged. Instead, put it on a charger and think about some of these issues and how we can best deal with them. I will now turn it over to Justin, and he'll talk about electric vehicles. Thank you.
I want to thank Peter and Stu Kaplan for asking me to talk today. I have 3 things to say today. 1, transportation electrification is here. 2, a lot of the decisions and the trade-offs turn on how you balance and how you set the slide rule. And 3, there's a conference about this August 20th to 23rd in Long Beach, California, where a lot of these issues will be discussed in greater detail than I can. I'm not a technologist. But we'll start with just vehicles today and see how that goes. So the first slide here is just to show you that every year, every quarter since 2011, electric vehicle sales have gone up and penetrated the market every year. So this next slide shows that range anxiety is decreasing. If you look around 2018, we're at around 174 miles for the range of an electric vehicle as the upper end of the capacity. In the next few years, that'll be closer to 200. And you'll see that there's a variety of additional options penetrating the market: SUVs, crossovers, minivans. And there's what that means, as you consider it from the per customer's perspective, is the increasing number of options leads to more adoption, which leads to penetration. I'll say that again, that people want choice. The more choice they get, the more likely they are to adopt. What's missing from the picture is trucks. What are the top 3 car sales in the country? The Ford F-150, the Chevy Silverado, the Dodge Ram. So why aren't we talking about hydrogen or natural gas? It's pretty simple. We're talking about electrifying the last 50 feet of the line up the driveway as opposed to a whole new infrastructure network. This is a slide from GM. It's 7, 8 years old. This shows what the projected growth curve and adoption curve for electric vehicles was. One of the ironies is semi-trucks are ahead of pickup trucks. But this has come to fruition. Does anybody want to guess what Tesla's saying their need for power over time is for their semi-truck? Just throw one out if somebody's got one. Go high. Go higher than you think you should go. They're saying a megawatt for 45 minutes per truck. And one of the things they're doing right now with their gigawatt factory is they're driving the trucks down the mountain using regen and driving them back up unloaded. But to give you a more personal example, I took one of our vehicles and drove it from San Francisco down to LA and back. And when I drove from Carmel to San Simeon, 126 miles, I had 100% charge and 100% full gas tank. So obviously it depends on the use, and there are different parameters that are out there, but the bottom line is, and this is a good case in point, Shenzhen, China, 12.5 million people, 16,000 electric buses, 12,000 electric taxis. Now those are different use cases. You've got low power cars that don't need a lot of high investment, and then you have 16,000 buses that need to be charged. But this is actually an example of what's happening. If we just look at the load curve, The area under the curve is the amount of discharge you need for the time that it can give it out. So a semi-truck or a bus is going to discharge more quickly, and it's going to need to get its power back more quickly, as opposed to a car which is parked 80% of the time. Pickup trucks fall in the middle. So does electric vehicle pin charging technology matter to ISOs and to utilities? Maybe. The lower level there, lower left quadrant, is a 19 kilowatt powered pin charger. It's compatible with the Tesla one on the lower right. The Tesla is 120 volts, 6 times faster. The upper two range between 50 kilowatts and 120 kilowatts. The upper right one will be going to 350 kilowatts next year. Tesla is saying they're going to 350 kilowatts next year as well. And this is the network that they show on their website. So that's their proprietary network. So what size pipe are we looking at when we are considering what kind of infrastructures are needed? If you build up from the base of the pyramid, most cars are at the home most of the time, and then at the work. You have not a lot of access that's public in those places, and you don't have a lot of time-intensive use. So lower level chargers, level 1 chargers, what we call those 20 kilowatt to 50 kilowatt are appropriate. If you're going to go intra-city, inter-city, or interstate, you're going to need faster charging because it's going to be time sensitive, and you're going to have an increase in cost while the owner's involvement will decrease. And so this is what would be needed, for instance, for a city like New York to electrify transportation. And at the same time, in California, we have vehicle-to-grid demonstrations going on right now that are funded through the CPUC and the CEC and our own research, where we have grid balancing technology. The Pacifica's arrived actually yesterday. If I'd gotten this deck together later in today, I would have been able to add the pictures. But the bottom line is the deck curve can flatten out when electric cars show up at 8 a.m. and plug in before solar is fully online. Additionally, there's a kind of slot car technology out here. Maybe not, I'm not the only one who wants the truckers in one lane. But if you look at this, this is a real technology in Sweden where they're getting vehicles across large areas using this recharge, where you don't necessarily electrify by charging station. Again, there's an opportunity to come and learn more about this. I'm happy to talk to you after the talk. Electrification conference, it's electrification2018.com. Thank you.